Teacher attacks. Black woman's son. She drags the school board to court. The slap of skin against cold tile echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Jalen Carter stumbled back, his books flying, his shoulder slammed into a metal locker. The hallway, once a hum of lockers clanking and sneakers squeaking, fell dead silent. Mrs. Penelope Rowe's face was inches from his, her breath ragged with fury. "I said, don't speak when I'm speaking," she snarled, her finger stabbing the air. Jalen, 12 years old, stood frozen. His dark brown eyes welled up, not from pain but confusion. His only offense had been answering a question she asked out loud. She had asked why magnesium reacted in water, and he'd known the answer. That was it. From the far end of the corridor, a security camera sat perched above the trophy case. Its little red light was off. By the time the assistant principal rushed over, the crowd of students had scattered. Only Jalen, wide-eyed and trembling, and Mrs. Rowe remained. "I want this boy suspended," she barked. "He's disruptive, aggressive." Jalen could barely speak. "But I was just answering." "Save it," she snapped. By the time Imani Carter arrived at Fairview Middle School, Jalen had been put in in-school suspension, and no one would look her in the eye. She entered the office with a calm that unnerved the staff. "Good morning," she said to the secretary, who swallowed hard. "I'm here about my son, Jalen Carter. You know, the aggressive one who weighs 90 pounds and carries around Pokemon folders." The principal, Mr. Caldwell, stepped out, already defensive. "We're still investigating, Miss Carter, but from what I understand, Jalen was behaving disruptively. Mrs. Rowe has filed an incident report. We're prioritizing safety." Imani tilted her head slightly. "Whose safety? Hers?" "She says he threatened her," Caldwell said, clearing his throat. "He's in 6th grade," Imani replied. "The only thing he threatens is cereal boxes." Caldwell forced a smile. "I understand you're upset." "No," she said. "Upset is what I felt when they ran out of hazelnut creamer this morning. This is something else." She leaned in just a bit. "I want to see the footage." Caldwell paused, then looked down at the folder in his hand. "Unfortunately, the hallway camera was under maintenance. There's no recording." "Convenient," Caldwell shifted. "These things happen." "That's funny," Imani said softly, "because things like this only seem to happen to kids who look like mine." A long pause hung in the air. Then Imani turned to leave, but not before she looked Caldwell square in the face. "You should tell Mrs. Rowe to get a lawyer, and you may want to call your own." That evening, Imani sat on the couch in her small but neatly kept apartment. Jalen was asleep in the next room, a thin bandage on his shoulder and a worn blanket pulled up to his chin. She stared at her phone for a moment, then she dialed. "Renee," she said when the line clicked on. "I'm cashing in that favor." The next morning at Fairview, whispers flew through the hallways. Jalen Carter, the quiet black kid who never raised his voice, was suddenly the name on everyone's lips. Kids from other grades started asking what happened. Some had seen it. One girl tried to show a video on her phone, but it had been taken by the school. Devices had been collected immediately after the incident for evidence. Mrs. Rowe walked the halls like nothing happened. But the students noticed something different. She was jumpy. She flinched when the PA system crackled. She snapped at the art teacher over coffee in the break room. In her classroom, she stood at the whiteboard, her back to her students, when a small, folded slip of paper slid across her desk. It read, "You messed with the wrong kid." Her hands trembled. Later that week, Imani returned to the school, but not alone. She walked beside Dr. Renee Owens, dressed in a dark gray pantsuit, heels clicking with every step. Renee was a seasoned civil rights attorney, and she had come prepared. At the front desk, the secretary looked up and went pale. "We're here to request all documentation relating to Jalen Carter, including incident reports, video files, and internal memos," Renee said. under the Freedom of Information Act. What? The secretary stammered. You'll need to speak with Principal Caldwell. Already did, Renee said, handing over an envelope. Here's the formal notice. You're now on record. As they walked out, Imani paused at the base of the school steps. Her eyes scanned the playground. A young janitor sweeping under the bleachers caught her gaze. He looked up, then quickly walked over, head low. He glanced around, then held out a flash drive. I saw what happened, he whispered. They deleted the backup footage, but I made a copy before they wiped the server. I got kids, too. Imani took it without a word. That night, Imani sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, coffee untouched. The screen showed the hallway. Mrs. Rowe, Jalen. Then came the moment. A pause, a slap, a shove. Jalen didn't move. He didn't yell. He didn't even lift his hands. The silence in the room was heavier than any sound. She clicked pause. Then she whispered, "Got you." The next day, Mrs. Rowe received an email with no sender. It was a single link. She clicked. It was the footage, the full incident, and below it a message. You have until Friday to resign. After that, we go public. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. Then she screamed. But Friday came and went, and Mrs. Rowe didn't resign. She doubled down. At a PTA meeting that weekend, she stood in front of the crowd and claimed she had been physically threatened by a volatile student. She framed herself as the victim. Imani watched from the back row. She didn't speak. She just recorded it all. Because next week they weren't going to talk at a school meeting. They were going to talk in court. And this time the whole world would be watching. The moment Monique sat across from Principal Harper, the air felt like it had been vacuum-sealed. Every word, every breath, every glance carried weight. She clutched her purse tightly, trying to steady the tremble in her hands. "Ms. Hughes," Harper began, folding his hands over the glossy mahogany desk. "I want you to know, we take these kinds of accusations very seriously, but we've spoken to Ms. Warren, and she claims your son was being disruptive." "Disruptive?" Monique raised an eyebrow. "Principal Harper, my son came home with a bloody lip, a bruised wrist, and a split notebook he barely touched because he was thrown into a locker." Harper shifted uncomfortably. "There's always two sides." "No," Monique cut him off. "There's truth, and then there's cover-up." Silence fell between them for a few seconds too long. Outside the office, Jordan sat on a bench flanked by two other boys. White boys, laughing, tossing a basketball between them. One of them, Chase Garland, was the son of the TA vice president. The other, Brian, had a dad who served on the school's funding committee. Monique's eyes narrowed as she noticed Miss Warren, the teacher in question, walk by without a glance toward her. Instead, Warren winked at the boys and kept walking. Monique turned back to Harper, her voice low and deliberate. "I want the footage from the hallway cameras." Harper's smile was tight. "Unfortunately, there were some technical issues. The cameras outside room 112 haven't been working for a few weeks." "That's convenient," she muttered. "I assure you we're doing everything we can," he said, standing to signal the meeting was over. "Let's allow the process to work. There's an internal review already underway." Monique stood too, her frame composed, but the fire in her eyes had only grown. "That process is broken, and I'm not here to wait quietly while my son becomes a headline." On the way out, she passed Ms. Warren again. This time, the teacher smirked. "You should teach him to follow directions," Warren said softly, but loud enough to be heard. Monique stopped mid-step. "And you should remember who you're talking to." When she got to her car, she leaned her forehead against the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed in her bag. It was an unknown number. She answered. "Hello?" "Ms. Hughes," a man's voice said. "This is Officer Lennox from the local precinct. I'm calling to let you know that a complaint was just filed against your son for assaulting a teacher." The words landed like a slap. "What?" "Yes, ma'am. Ms. Warren claimed that he raised his voice. used threatening language, and pushed her. "We'll need you both to come in for a statement." Monique felt her heart stop for half a second. This wasn't just a classroom incident anymore. This was war. The next morning she arrived at the precinct with Jordan. He stayed quiet, shrinking into his hoodie. Detective Lennox glanced at them and waved them into a back room. Unlike the friendly voice on the phone, in person he looked tired and skeptical. Monique noticed the thin file on the table. "What's this about?" she asked. He opened the file and sighed. "Honestly, this is thin. Teacher says your son shoved her, but there were no witnesses, no video, no other injuries. Still, school policy says we have to log it." "She's lying," Jordan said suddenly, sitting upright. Lennox leaned forward. "Did you touch her, son?" "I didn't even raise my voice. I told her I didn't want to read out loud. She grabbed my shoulder and yelled in my face." Monique's jaw clenched. She turned to Lennox. "If I get you students willing to talk, kids in that room, would you listen?" He hesitated. "If they're willing to testify, sure, but unless they come forward, I can't do much." She left the precinct that day with a plan brewing in her mind. Jordan wasn't just going to be another number. She was going to flip this whole mess upside down. Back at home, she started making calls. Old college friends who now worked in law. A cousin at the DA's office. Even a former journalist who owed her a favor. Then came the twist. A girl named Layla, one of Jordan's classmates, sent her an anonymous message. "I saw everything." She threw his notebook at him and called him a problem child. "I'll talk." "Just not with my name," Monique replied instantly. "I'll protect you." That night, sitting across from Jordan at the dinner table, she finally smiled. "We're not backing down, baby," she said. "You're not alone, and we're not going to let them bury this." Jordan didn't say anything, but the way he looked at her, eyes wide, finally hopeful, said everything she needed to hear. Monique sat alone in the dim corner of Cafe Bravado, a small neighborhood spot near downtown Atlanta, where the booths were deep and the staff knew when to mind their business. A half-empty mug of herbal tea sat untouched in front of her, growing cold like the trust she once had in the school system. Her laptop glowed softly as she reread Layla's anonymous message for the 10th time. The words never lost their sting. She threw the notebook at him. She said he was a problem child. I saw it. That message was more than validation. It was ammunition. Monique picked up her phone and dialed. "Samira, it's time." Her best friend, Samira Boyd, had been waiting for that call. A civil rights attorney with a sharp tongue and an even sharper suit collection, Samira had been trying to convince Monique to go public since day one. "Thought you'd never ask," Samira replied. "Meet me at my office in an hour. We're burning it all down." By 8:15 a.m., Monique walked into a quiet legal firm tucked between an art gallery and a yoga studio. Samira's office was all clean lines and stacked case files. Jordan trailed behind her, his backpack still slung over one shoulder, silent but observant. "You ready to fight this?" Samira asked him. Jordan gave a small nod, but it was Monique who spoke up. "He doesn't need to be ready. I am." They laid out the plan. First, request the school's internal investigation files under the Freedom of Information Act. Second, gather testimonials from Jordan's classmates. Third, contact the media, but only when the timing was right. And that's when Monique dropped the twist. "I'm filing a civil lawsuit against the district and the teacher personally." Samira blinked. "You sure you want to go that far?" "She filed assault charges against my son. I'm not just defending him, I'm exposing her." Samira grinned. "I'll draft the paperwork. But it's going to get messy." Messy was an understatement. By the following week, the school board had gotten wind of the lawsuit. A confidential email began circulating among district administrators, warning them not to speak with press or external parties. But leaks were inevitable. An anonymous source forwarded the email to a local education blogger who ran a small but loyal site called School Watch South. Within 24 hours, the headline read, "Mother of 12-year-old files suit after teacher allegedly assaults her son." The story spread faster than wildfire. Back at the school, Miss Warren began showing signs of panic. She stopped speaking during staff meetings, avoided Monique at pickup, and had a noticeable tremble in her hands during class. Meanwhile, several parents began whispering about other incidents, old stories of strict discipline that never made it to official reports. Then came a surprise witness, Miss Carver, the school librarian. She approached Monique one morning as she waited for Jordan. "Ms. Hughes, I've been here for 19 years, she said quietly. That woman has always had a problem with students like Jordan. Smart, outspoken, different. Are you willing to say that publicly?" Ms. Carver hesitated. "I could lose my job." "You might help protect the next kid." There was a pause, then a faint nod. "I'll talk." Later that day, Samira received a call from the district's attorney requesting a private meeting. "They want to settle," she told Monique. Monique leaned forward. "What are they offering?" "Money." A quiet retraction of the charges. No public apology. Monique shook her head. "No deal. I want them exposed. I want accountability. I want her to answer in front of the board and the parents. I'm not settling for silence." That night, she and Jordan sat side by side on the living room floor, sorting through handwritten letters from students who wanted to help. Some were scared, some were angry, but they all told stories that mirrored Jordan's. "I didn't know so many other kids were dealing with this," Jordan whispered. Monique put her arm around his shoulder. "That's how it always works. Silence protects the ones who hurt us. But we're going to change that." Then came a final twist before the court date. A parent reached out, Chase Garland's mother. "I need to talk," she said, her voice shaking. "My son told me what happened. He said Miss Warren told him and Brian to keep quiet. She said they'd get detention if they told anyone Jordan didn't do anything wrong." Monique's pulse spiked. "Will he testify?" "I'll make sure he does." By the end of that week, Samira had built a case stronger than anyone expected. There were no longer just accusations. There were patterns, testimonies, evidence of threats, manipulation, and systemic negligence. It was no longer just about Jordan. It was about every kid whose voice had been silenced. And Monique was no longer just a mother defending her son. She was leading a battle. The courtroom was packed. Every bench was filled. The tension in the air was heavy enough to choke on, a mixture of curiosity, judgment, and anticipation. Reporters leaned forward with pens ready, photographers clicked silently from the back, and a few teachers from Harper Elementary whispered behind cupped hands. And in the center of it all sat Camille Warren, calm and composed. Her eyes were locked on the defense table, where Principal Janice McGraw sat pale and fidgeting, and next to her, the district's legal team flipped through documents with a nervous energy that betrayed their uncertainty. Camille's son, Miles, was sitting beside her, now wearing a navy blazer and a small pin on his collar, a symbol of the youth STEM program he had just been accepted into. The contrast between the boy who had once sat humiliated on a classroom floor and the young man sitting proudly in court today was stark. The judge entered. "All rise." Everyone stood, and as Judge Henry McMillan took his seat, a hush fell. Camille didn't blink. "This hearing will now come to order. Case number 45C239, the clerk read, Warren v. Harper Elementary School and the Board of Education." Camille stood. Her lawyer, Natasha Brooks, rose beside her, heels clicking sharply on the polished floor as she stepped to the center. "We intend to prove," Natasha began, her voice confident and deliberate, "that Harper Elementary School, through its staff and administration, knowingly failed to protect a student from racial targeting, emotional harm, and physical abuse. That the teacher involved, Ms. Lauren Braddock, not only acted with malicious intent, but was protected by the silence of those above her, and that Mrs. Warren, who sought justice through all available internal channels, was forced to bring this to court only after every door was shut in her face. Whispers buzzed. A few people turned to look at Ms. Braddock, who wasn't present. Her absence screamed louder than any statement. The defense attorney tried to object early. "There is no evidence Ms. Braddock acted with racist intent," he offered. "At most, it was an unfortunate miscommunication." "Your Honor," Natasha cut in smoothly, "we have multiple documented incidents, testimony from 3 students, and an internal email thread that contradicts that claim. The emails were submitted in our pre-trial evidence package." The judge nodded. "Let's proceed." Then came the bombshell. Natasha called the first witness, Mrs. Kellerman, the school's secretary. A kind-faced woman in her late 50s who had worked at Harper Elementary for over 2 decades. She looked nervous. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the oath. "Mrs. Kellerman," Natasha asked, "do you recall receiving any complaints from Ms. Braddock about Miles Warren prior to the incident?" She hesitated. "Yes, several. She often said he was too confident and once called him a know-it-all in need of humbling." Gasps scattered across the room. "And did Ms. Braddock ever mention race or Miles's background?" Silence. Mrs. Kellerman looked down. "She once said, 'Kids like him think they're untouchable these days.'" The courtroom fell dead quiet. The judge leaned forward. "Could you clarify what she meant by kids like him?" "I took it to mean black children," she whispered. Across the courtroom, Principal McGraw's lawyer stood so quickly his chair tipped backward. "Objection." "Overruled," Judge McMillan said firmly. Camille didn't smile. She simply placed her hand on her son's. His fingers tightened around hers. Then Natasha called the second witness, a fellow student named Jake Patel, 11 years old, small for his age but with eyes that carried the weight of truth. He confirmed that Miss Braddock had pulled Miles up by the arm, accused him of cheating on a math problem he had done in his head, and humiliated him in front of the class. "Did she ever accuse anyone else of cheating?" Natasha asked. "No, ma'am," Jake said. "Just Miles, even when he was right." Camille's breath caught when the next piece of evidence was presented. A security camera video, never meant for public view, that had captured audio from the classroom door. On it, Ms. Braddock could be heard muttering to herself after Miles answered a question. "Of course he knew it. Thinks he's some kind of genius. Probably rehearsed it with his mom." The footage was damning. By the time Natasha rested her case, the courtroom's energy had shifted completely. Even the judge's face showed signs of concern. The defense scrambled. They brought in Dr. Harris, a psychologist, who argued Miles didn't suffer lasting trauma. They brought up Camille's refusal to attend a PTA meeting, as if it were a character flaw. But no spin could undo what the room had heard. Then Camille stood. "I wasn't going to speak today," she began, "but I realize silence has allowed people like Ms. Braddock to thrive." She turned to the judge, then to the audience. "I am a mother, but I'm also an advocate, and I'm telling you, this wasn't just about my son being humiliated. This was about a system that tried to shut us up, that told me over and over again, 'Maybe you misunderstood,' that let a child be mistreated and offered no protection, no apology, no accountability." Her voice didn't shake. It cut through the room like a scalpel. The judge nodded slowly, clearly moved. "Court will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments." As people filed out, news cameras flashed. Camille ignored them. Her focus was on Miles. "You did good," she whispered. He looked up at her with pride. "So did you." What neither of them saw was the board member in the back row quietly pulling out his phone, already texting the superintendent. Trouble was coming for Harper Elementary, and this time it wouldn't be so quiet. Camille sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, but her eyes weren't on the screen. They were locked on the document she'd been rewriting for days, the official motion for punitive damages against Harper Elementary and the district. The kitchen was silent except for the ticking of a wall clock and the occasional scrape of Miles's pencil as he did his homework across from her. "Mom," he asked softly, "do you think they'll believe everything?" She looked up and forced a smile. They don't need to believe everything. They just need to believe the truth. But the truth was getting heavier by the day. The next morning, Natasha texted Camille before sunrise. "Need you at the courthouse by 9. Something big. Do not be late." Camille's stomach tightened. Something big in a case like this never meant peace. By 9 a.m., the courtroom was half full, attorneys, board members, and a few local news stations already setting up outside. Camille walked in wearing a deep maroon suit and flat shoes, her curls pulled into a low bun. Miles stayed home, Natasha had insisted. When Kyle entered the room, she immediately sensed the shift. The school district's legal team looked rattled. Their head attorney, David Kane, was on the phone, pacing like a man trying to hold back an avalanche. Natasha leaned in. "They just received an anonymous email last night." "What kind of email?" "A PDF attachment, a full internal audit. Someone inside the district sent us documents exposing a pattern, 3 other complaints against Braddock in the last 5 years. All buried, all involving black students." Camille's pulse surged. "And the district knew?" "They did more than know. They paid out settlements with NDAs attached. Parents were pressured into silence." Before Camille could respond, the judge entered. "All rise." The session began with a request from the plaintiff, Natasha. "Your Honor, due to new evidence received late last night, we request a brief adjournment to verify and authenticate documents submitted anonymously. These documents, if confirmed, establish not only a pattern of misconduct by Ms. Braddock, but also a systemic cover-up by the district." The judge blinked. "Have you notified opposing counsel?" "They received the documents within minutes of us." David Kane rose, his face pale. "Your Honor, we object to this delay. These documents are unverified, potentially fabricated." "Actually," Natasha interrupted, "we already have confirmation. One of the settlement recipients has agreed to testify. She's in the building." The room froze. Kane tried to speak but choked on the words. The judge looked between them. "Bring her in." The door opened slowly, and a woman in her late 30s entered. Her name was Chelsea Monroe, a former single mother whose son had been pulled from Harper Elementary 3 years ago. She took the stand. "I was told if I signed the NDA and took the settlement, they'd make sure Braddock was disciplined," she said. "Instead, she stayed. My son was labeled difficult and moved to another district." "Why come forward now?" Natasha asked. Chelsea's voice cracked. "Because I saw Camille on the news. I saw her boy, and I realized they're still doing this, still burying it. I couldn't stay quiet." Camille's hand clenched around the seat rail. Her eyes burned, not from sadness, but rage. Chelsea continued. "The settlement was hush money. That's what they called it in the email chain. Standard hush payout. That's what they said." The judge called a recess. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Camille and Natasha held back, watching as David Kane stormed into his black SUV, slamming the door behind him. That night, Camille couldn't sleep. She sat in her backyard under the stars, a glass of water untouched beside her. Natasha called just after midnight. "You sitting down?" "Yes." "I just got confirmation. Janice McGraw, the principal, is stepping down. Officially, it's health reasons. But off the record, she was asked to resign." Camille exhaled, one down. "Also," Natasha added, "the email leak, I found out where it came from." "Who?" There was a pause. "An assistant at the district office, young guy named Mateo Ellis, new hire. He was asked to help shred old files, found the emails and copied them instead." Camille sat up straighter. "He risked his job for that?" "He said he couldn't unsee it. He's willing to testify too." Camille stared at the stars, then finally said, "I want him protected." Already on it. The next morning, Camille met Mateo in person. He was barely 24, nervous and earnest, wearing a faded hoodie and shaking hands like it was his first courtroom ever. "You're brave," Camille told him. He laughed nervously. "No, just tired of watching people act like this stuff is normal." For the first time in days, Camille smiled without forcing it. As they prepared for the next hearing, word spread. The school board tried to spin it, issuing public statements, launching an internal review, and promising reform. But it was too late. The documents were real, the testimonies too strong, and the pressure building. Behind the scenes, Natasha was filing a motion to request full board records for the past decade. "They're not ready for what we're about to find," she whispered to Camille. Camille didn't blink. "Good," she said. "It's time somebody was." The courthouse hallway buzzed with tension like a stretched wire. Reporters crowded behind velvet ropes, cameras clicked in bursts, and hushed murmurs echoed off the marble walls. Camille's heels tapped steadily on the floor as she approached the courtroom doors, flanked by Natasha and Mateo. Inside, Judge Kavanaugh had reconvened proceedings early to review the latest revelations. The leaked documents had cracked open a dam that no one could hold back now. 3 other families had contacted Natasha since Chelsea's testimony, each with nearly identical stories, settlements, NDAs, silence bought and buried. Camille glanced at Natasha. "You ready to go nuclear?" Natasha smirked. "Oh, I've already lit the fuse." As the court came to order, Kane looked like he hadn't slept. His team fumbled through binders and iPads, their once confident posture now crumbling. Natasha stood. "Your Honor, we move to expand the scope of this case. The pattern of abuse and administrative neglect is not limited to a single teacher. It is systemic. We request a full inquiry into the Harper Elementary Administration's disciplinary policies over the past 10 years. The judge leaned forward. "You're asking to put the entire district on trial?" "Yes, Your Honor, because that's what this case has become." Kane objected, of course, loudly. "Your Honor, this is a gross overreach. We are here because of a single alleged incident involving Ms. Braddock and the plaintiff's son, not to relitigate the entire district's history." Natasha countered, cool and sharp. "With all due respect, Mr. Kane, when that history includes repeated violations of civil rights, hush money settlements, and a culture of protecting abusers, yes, we absolutely are." The judge called for a recess. In the hallway, Kane approached Camille. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said, voice low. "What I should have done years ago," she replied without blinking. "You're going to destroy lives." "No? I'm going to expose the ones that already have been." He hesitated. "You think you're the only one with a child in this district?" Camille's eyes narrowed. "No, I'm just the only one who stopped being afraid." That night, while reviewing evidence, Camille received a call from a blocked number. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was raspy, female. "I can't talk long, but I worked at Harper Elementary 2 years ago. I saw what Braddock did to those kids. They made me sign an NDA too, but I never cashed the check. I still have my emails. My name is Dana Pierce." Camille sat up straighter. "Why are you coming forward now?" "Because I saw what they did to you, what they did to your son. I can't stay quiet anymore. I'll testify." Camille's voice trembled. "You understand what you're risking?" "Yes, and I'm done living with the guilt." By morning, Donna had met with Natasha and provided a trove of internal communications. Her testimony would solidify their argument that the district operated a coordinated cover-up. Emails from administrators warning teachers to handle things in-house. Even references to a red folder of disciplinary issues never officially reported. The twist came later that afternoon. News broke that the superintendent of the district, Harold Connolly, had quietly resigned. but leaked emails showed he had been aware of all 3 prior Braddock cases and had authorized the settlements personally. Natasha called Camille as soon as it dropped. "We just decapitated the beast," Camille exhaled. "Then let's bury it." But the backlash came fast. Board members began giving public statements denying knowledge. Protests broke out outside the school district building. Parents demanded resignations. Some claimed the entire lawsuit was politically motivated. At home, Miles sat silently at the table, watching the coverage on the kitchen TV. "Am I the reason this is happening?" he asked softly. Camille knelt beside him. "No, baby, you're the reason we're fixing it." "But everyone's mad. Sometimes people get mad when you make them look at the truth. That doesn't mean you stop." He nodded, lips tight. "Okay." Back in court, Judge Kavanaugh agreed to expand the scope of the case. For the first time, Camille saw Kane falter. His hands shook as he adjusted his glasses. He knew what was coming, and it wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. It was a reckoning. That night, Camille received an email from an unknown address. Subject: "We're with you." Attached was a petition with over 15,000 signatures from parents and teachers across the state demanding a full federal investigation into Harper Elementary and the broader district. It had gone viral. People were watching. As she stared at the screen, Camille felt something shift deep in her chest. Not just justice, not just revenge, something bigger. A movement. And they were only halfway through. The courtroom felt like a stage now, and every seat was filled. Spectators packed the benches, local news cameras lined the back wall, and outside protesters held signs demanding accountability. Camille stood near the plaintiff's table, her shoulders squared beneath her tailored navy suit, a quiet storm in her eyes. She wasn't just a mother fighting for her son anymore. She had become the face of a broader fight. Dana Pierce took the stand first. Her voice trembled slightly as she began, but by the 3rd sentence, she steadied. "I was a classroom aide at Harper Elementary from 2019 to 2021. I personally witnessed Ms. Braddock scream at, shove, and grab multiple students by the arm. I reported it to the assistant principal. Nothing happened. In fact, I was warned not to bring it up again." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Then she added, "When I insisted on following up, I was given an NDA and told to take a sabbatical. I never returned." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Natasha approached the bench with printed emails, school memos, and notes Dana had preserved over the years. They painted a picture of a district desperate to protect itself, not its students. Judge Kavanaugh scanned the evidence, his brows furrowing deeper with every page. The twist hit like a thunderclap. "Your Honor," Natasha said, "we have submitted these documents under seal, but one in particular requires your attention immediately." The judge gestured for the file. It was a letter dated 18 months prior, an internal memo from Superintendent Harold Connolly to Principal Dorsey. In it, Connolly specifically instructed the school to keep the Braddock issue off record, citing that bad press right now could jeopardize our grant funding. Even the jury stirred. Camille's gaze snapped to Kane. He was pale, his jaw clenched so tightly his molars must have been grinding. She could almost hear them shatter. Outside, the story exploded. The media grabbed onto the grant funding angle like a bloodhound. What had started as a lawsuit now looked like a full-blown corruption scandal. That afternoon, the defense scrambled. Kane attempted to file a motion to exclude Dana's testimony, claiming it fell outside the scope of the original case, but Judge Kavanaugh denied it. In light of the new evidence and mounting proof of systemic concealment, the court finds it necessary to allow the plaintiff's line of inquiry to proceed. Then came the unexpected blow, delivered by one of their own, a surprise witness. Ms. Aria Morales, a current teacher at Harper Elementary, stepped forward voluntarily. She had stayed silent out of fear for years, but could no longer stomach the lies. Last fall, she testified. Ms. Braddock shoved a child into a chair so hard that he cried for 20 minutes. She said he was disrespectful. That student was 7. I reported it. No one followed up. Did you ever confront Ms. Braddock? Natasha asked. Yes, Arya said softly. She told me, those kids don't have parents who'll come for them. Who's going to believe them over me? Dead silence. In the jury box, one woman covered her mouth with her hand. A man next to her wiped his eyes. By the end of the day, the case had snowballed into something none of them could have predicted. 4 or more anonymous teachers sent in statements to Natasha's office. A local news station ran a segment called The Harper Files that evening, compiling every known instance of abuse and district silence. But it was what happened at home that struck Camille the hardest. Miles had been unusually quiet all week. That night, as they ate dinner, he finally broke the silence. "Do people believe me now?" he asked. Camille put down her fork. "Yes, baby, they do." "Then why do I still feel like I can't breathe?" She leaned over and wrapped him in her arms. "Because carrying the truth this long is heavy, but you're not alone anymore." He held on to her tightly. "Promise?" "I promise." The next morning, as the sun rose over the city, Judge Kavanaugh ordered an emergency session. The trial would be extended, and federal investigators had been granted access to the school board's full records. Camille stood on the courthouse steps, reporters swarming around her. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply said, "This is no longer about one teacher. It's about an entire system that believed some children mattered less than others. That ends today." And as the crowd behind her cheered, Miles watched from the window above, hand pressed to the glass. His story finally heard, and justice finally close. The courtroom was packed tighter than ever, with every row filled and overflow, seating crammed with spectators. Outside, the crowd had doubled overnight. Protest signs, news vans, and chants echoed down the block. Justice for Miles banners hung from the courthouse railings, and a mural of Camille holding her son's hand had appeared on the wall across the street, spray-painted overnight by a local artist. Inside, all eyes were on Judge Kavanaugh as he entered the courtroom with solemnity and gravity. The tension in the room was sharp enough to cut air. Camille sat beside Natasha, her jaw firm, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Miles sat directly behind her, flanked by his aunt and their family pastor. Kane Braddock looked like a man unraveling. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot. Behind him, Superintendent Connolly was nowhere to be seen. Rumors swirled that he'd been placed on administrative leave pending federal investigation. Rumors Camille no longer needed confirmed. The damage was done. "The court has reviewed the evidence," Judge Kavanaugh began, voice steady, commanding. "We have heard from educators, experts, administrators, and, most importantly, the children harmed under the system's silence. The facts are irrefutable." He turned toward the jury, who had returned after only 3 hours of deliberation. The foreman rose. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff. We award $3.5 million in damages to Miles Carter and recommend disciplinary action be taken at the highest level of the school district." Gas. Cheers. A few sobs. Camille closed her eyes, her hand flying to her mouth as tears brimmed. Miles reached forward and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. The judge wasn't finished. "In addition, this court is recommending a full independent audit of Harper Elementary and the Metro Unified School District for potential civil rights violations and criminal negligence. It is the opinion of this court that systemic abuse was not only ignored, but enabled." Silence. Then thunderous applause. Kane visibly crumbled, his hands shaking, his eyes glassy. When the bailiff approached, he didn't resist. Not because he was under arrest, but because he finally understood. He was over. A reporter yelled out, "Do you have anything to say to the Carter family?" He turned, opened his mouth, then shut it again. What could he say? Camille didn't even look his way. She had already moved on. Her fight was never just about him. As the courtroom emptied, Natasha wrapped Camille in a long, firm hug. "You did it." "No," Camille said, wiping her eyes. "Miles did." In the courthouse lobby, local officials approached Camille. "We want to meet next week," said one board member, a young Latina councilwoman who'd shown up quietly each day of the trial. "Help us draft a reform package, teacher training, abuse protocols, equity policies. We're ready to listen now." Camille nodded. "You better be." Later that evening, the family returned home to find their front yard filled with neighbors, friends, and even strangers. There were balloons, a cake, signs with "You're our voice" scrawled in childlike handwriting. But one moment stood out. A woman in her 60s approached. Her skin was sun-worn, her eyes tired. She introduced herself as Ms. Rayner, a retired teacher from Mississippi who'd driven 8 hours just to thank Camille. "I taught through 3 different desegregation policies," she said. "I saw what silence cost generations of black children. What you did today, it gives me hope I didn't waste my fight." Camille hugged her, heart swelling. The night ended with Miles sitting beside a small bonfire in their backyard, surrounded by kids from his school. He laughed louder than Camille had heard in months. Real laughter. No edge, no fear. And when he turned to her and said, "Mom, I want to help other kids now," she felt something click into place. She bent down beside him. "Then we start tomorrow." The next day, Camille and Natasha held a press conference on the courthouse steps. "I didn't set out to be a hero," Camille said. "I set out to protect my son. But what I found was a system that believed some children were disposable. I couldn't let that stand. So if you're watching this, if you're a parent, a teacher, a student, know this. Your voice matters. Speak up. Demand more. Don't let anyone tell you your child isn't worth fighting for." She paused, looking into the cameras. "And to every school board watching, we're done asking nicely." If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you hopeful, don't scroll past. Share it. Talk about it. Let your school board know you're watching. Justice isn't just a verdict in a courtroom. It's what we demand from the systems around us. Subscribe for more powerful stories that speak truth and expose injustice. Together, we amplify the voices that too often go unheard.